The familiar ache in my lower back had become my constant companion over the past few weeks. Each 12-hour shift at Mercy General Hospital testing the limits of what my body could endure. I adjusted the loose-fitting scrubs for what felt like the 100th time that evening, grateful for the oversized top that concealed the growing curve of my belly beneath. 7 months. 7 months of hiding, of careful positioning, of strategic angles that kept my secret buried beneath layers of navy blue fabric. The fluorescent lights overhead cast their harsh, clinical glow across the cardiac wing, illuminating the polished linoleum floors that reflected every footstep with an almost musical quality. The persistent hum of machines, the distant beeping of monitors, and the soft whisper of ventilation systems created the symphony I'd grown to know by heart. But tonight, something felt different. The air seemed thicker, more oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. "Madison, we need you in room 314. Mr. Patterson is asking for his pain medication again." Sarah's voice cut through my thoughts as she approached the nurse's station, her blonde ponytail bouncing with each hurried step. She was one of the few people here who I considered more than just a colleague, though even she didn't know the truth about my condition. I nodded, checking the medication chart on my tablet. "Third time tonight. His surgery was only yesterday, so the pain is expected." My voice sounded steadier than I felt, a skill I'd perfected over months of practice. Every conversation was a performance now, every interaction carefully calibrated to maintain the illusion of normalcy. The walk to room 314 felt longer than usual, each step sending small shockwaves through my pelvis. I'd attributed the increasing discomfort to long hours on my feet, to the stress of maintaining my secret, to anything other than what my medical training told me it might actually be. Not yet. It was too early. I had a plan, a carefully constructed timeline that would see me through the next 2 months before I could quietly disappear, have my baby in a different city, and start over somewhere Vincent Moretti would never find us. Vincent. Even thinking his name sent a complex mix of emotions coursing through me. That night in Las Vegas felt like a lifetime ago now, though it had only been 10 months since I'd made the impulsive decision to attend my cousin's bachelorette party. I could still remember every detail with crystalline clarity. The way his dark eyes had found mine across the crowded casino bar. The magnetic pull I'd felt when he'd smiled at me. The electricity that had sparked between us when he'd introduced himself simply as Vincent, with no last name offered. I'd been so naive then, so completely unaware that the charming businessman who'd bought me drinks and made me laugh was actually one of the most dangerous men in Nevada. The man whose face I'd later seen on the news, though always carefully obscured, always referred to in whispers and speculation. By the time I'd realized who he really was, I was already pregnant and terrified of what he might do if he discovered the truth. Mr. Patterson was sitting up in bed when I entered his room, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes alert. "Nurse Madison, thank goodness. The pain is getting worse, especially here." He gestured to his chest where the surgical incision ran beneath his hospital gown. "Let me take a look," I said, moving carefully to his bedside. As I leaned forward to examine the incision site, a sharp, sudden pain shot through my abdomen, so intense it made me gasp and grip the bedrail for support. "Are you all right, dear?" Mr. Patterson asked, concern replacing his own discomfort as he watched my face go pale. "I'm fine," I managed, though my breathing had become shallow and rapid. "Just a muscle cramp. Let me get your pain medication." I straightened slowly, fighting the urge to place my hand protectively over my belly. Not here. Not in front of a patient. The walk to the medication room felt like moving through water, each step requiring enormous effort. Another pain hit as I was preparing the injection, this one lasting longer and centered lower in my back. I gripped the counter, counting slowly to 10 as I'd learned in nursing school, trying to assess what was happening to my body with clinical detachment. Braxton Hicks contractions. That's what this had to be. Practice contractions, false labor, stress-induced muscle spasms, anything other than the alternative that my mind refused to fully acknowledge. I returned to Mr. Patterson's room and administered his medication with hands that trembled only slightly. "This should help with the pain," I said, checking his vitals one more time. "Press the call button if you need anything else." As I walked back toward the nurse's station, another contraction gripped me, stronger than the previous ones. This time I couldn't hide the sharp intake of breath, couldn't prevent my hand from instinctively moving to my lower abdomen. The timing was unmistakable now, roughly 10 minutes apart, each one building in intensity. Madison. Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away, though she was standing right beside me. You look terrible. Are you feeling sick? I opened my mouth to deflect, to offer some explanation about fatigue or coming down with something, but another contraction chose that moment to hit. This one brought me to my knees, literally, as I gripped the nurse's station counter and tried to breathe through the pain. Oh my God, Madison. Sarah was at my side instantly, her training kicking in as she assessed the situation. How far along are you? The question I dreaded for months hung in the air between us. There was no hiding it now. No loose scrubs or strategic positioning that could conceal what was happening. 7 months, I whispered, the admission feeling like a physical weight lifted from my chest even as another one settled there. 7 months? Madison, why didn't you tell anyone? We need to get you to labor and delivery right now. Sarah was already reaching for a wheelchair, her movements efficient and professional despite the shock in her voice. No, I said, panic rising in my throat. I can't. Not here. Not at Mercy General. The irony wasn't lost on me that the hospital where I'd worked for 3 years, where I'd helped deliver countless babies, was the one place I'd sworn I would never give birth. You don't have a choice, Sarah said firmly, helping me into the wheelchair. These contractions are getting stronger, and if you're in active labor at 7 months, we need to monitor both you and the baby immediately. As she wheeled me toward the elevator, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished steel doors. My face was flushed and damp with perspiration, my carefully maintained facade finally cracking under the pressure of what my body was demanding. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. I was supposed to have 2 more months to plan, to save money, to disappear before anyone could connect the dots. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt eternal. Each floor we passed marking another step away from the anonymity I'd fought so hard to maintain. When the doors opened to reveal the familiar chaos of the labor and delivery ward, I felt the last vestiges of control slip away from my grasp. We need a room immediately, Sarah called to the charge nurse as we emerged from the elevator. 7 months, active labor, hospital employee. The charge nurse, Maria, looked up from her charts and her eyes widened in recognition. Madison? Oh, honey, we had no idea. Her voice was kind but tinged with the same shock that had colored Sarah's reaction. As they wheeled me into a private room and began the familiar routine of admission procedures, I closed my eyes and tried to find some center of calm in the storm that was rapidly approaching. But even as the medical team worked around me with professional efficiency, even as the monitors began their electronic symphony tracking my contractions and the baby's heartbeat, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered that this was exactly what Vincent had been waiting for. That somehow, despite all my precautions, he would know. The thought sent another kind of pain through me, one that had nothing to do with labor and everything to do with the terrifying certainty that my carefully constructed walls were about to come crashing down. Part 2, the siege. The next few hours passed in a haze of medical procedures and mounting dread. Dr. Chen, the attending obstetrician, had confirmed what I already knew, but had been desperately denying. I was in active labor, and there was no stopping it. At 30 weeks, my son would be premature but viable, requiring immediate NICU care, but with excellent prospects for a healthy life. My son. The words felt foreign in my mind. This reality I'd been postponing suddenly thrust upon me with the relentless force of each contraction. As the nursing staff bustled around me, checking monitors and adjusting IV drips, I found myself studying their faces for any sign of recognition, any hint that they knew more than they were letting on. Madison, we need to update your emergency contact information, Maria said gently, holding a clipboard. The form just says, none, but surely there's someone you'd like us to call. There's no one, I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but the truth was infinitely more dangerous. My parents lived across the country and believed I was thriving in my nursing career, blissfully unaware of the mess I'd made of my life. And Vincent. Vincent could never know. Maria's expression softened with sympathy. Honey, you don't have to go through this alone. Even if it's just a friend. Before I could respond, another contraction gripped me, stronger than the others, demanding my complete attention. As I breathed through it, focusing on the relaxation techniques I'd learned in nursing school, I became aware of a commotion in the hallway outside my room. Sir, you can't go in there without authorization, a voice was saying firmly. This is a restricted area. I have authorization, came the reply, and my blood turned to ice. That voice, deep and authoritative with just the hint of an accent that spoke of old-world sophistication, was one I'd tried so hard to forget but never could. Vincent. The door to my room opened, and Maria stepped out into the hallway. I could hear her speaking to someone, her tone professional but strained. I'm sorry, but unless you're immediate family or listed as an emergency contact, I can't allow. Check with hospital administration. Vincent's voice cut through her protests smoothly. They'll confirm my authorization to be here. My heart hammered against my ribs as I listened to Maria make a phone call, her voice growing increasingly confused and deferential. Yes, Mr. Moretti. Of course. Right away, sir. There was a pause. Then, I understand. Thank you for clarifying. When Maria returned to my room, her face was carefully composed, but I could see the questions in her eyes. Madison, it seems you do have someone here to see you. Mr. Moretti says he's the baby's father? The words hit me like a physical blow. After 10 months of hiding, of careful planning and desperate precautions, he had found me. Worse, he already knew about the baby. The realization sent panic coursing through my veins, even as another contraction built. I don't want to see him, I managed between gritted teeth. Please don't let him in here. Maria's expression was sympathetic but helpless. I'm sorry, honey, but the authorization came from the top. Hospital policy. She trailed off as the door opened again. Vincent Moretti stepped into my room, and the space immediately felt smaller, the air thicker. He was exactly as I remembered him, but somehow more imposing in the sterile hospital environment. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, his charcoal suit immaculate and expensive. But it was his eyes that held me captive. Those dark, penetrating eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense I'd ever built. Hello, Madison, he said softly, his voice carrying a weight of authority that made the nursing staff unconsciously straighten. It's been a while. Get out, I whispered, though we both knew it was an empty demand. The very fact that he was here, that he'd somehow gained access to a restricted hospital area at nearly midnight, spoke volumes about the extent of his influence. Vincent moved closer to my bed with the fluid grace I remembered, his presence commanding despite the clinical setting. You look beautiful, he said, and there was something almost tender in his voice that made my chest tighten. Even now, even like this. How did you find me? The question slipped out before I could stop it, revealing my desperation to understand how thoroughly my carefully constructed refuge had been compromised. His smile was slight, but knowing. Did you really think you could disappear from me so completely? A nursing license requires registration with the state board. Hospital employment requires background checks. Bank accounts leave paper trails. He paused, letting the implications sink in. I've known where you were for months, Madison. I've been watching over you. The word sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. Watching over me. Protecting you, he corrected, moving to stand beside my bed. Do you think it was a coincidence that you got this job so easily? That your apartment application was approved despite your credit score? That you've never had any trouble here? Never faced any of the harassment that beautiful women in your position often encounter? Each revelation was like another piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving, showing me how completely I'd been living in an illusion of independence. The security guard who always walks me to my car after night shifts, I said slowly, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. One of mine, Vincent confirmed. The maintenance man who fixed your apartment's heating system for free. The grocery store manager who always seems to have your favorite items in stock despite supply shortages. His hand moved as if to touch my face. then stopped just short of contact. Did you really think I would let the mother of my child struggle alone in this world? Another contraction hit, this one strong enough to make me grip the bed rails and focus entirely on breathing through the pain. When it passed, I found Vincent watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, concern mixed with something possessive and primitive. "Our son is coming early," he observed, his voice softer now. "The doctors say he'll be fine, but he'll need specialized care. The best neonatologists, private rooms, round-the-clock monitoring." His gaze met mine directly. "Things that require resources you don't have." "I have insurance," I said weakly, though we both knew the limitations of my hospital coverage. "Your insurance has a lifetime cap of $1 million for NICU care," Vincent replied without hesitation, demonstrating a knowledge of my personal finances that was both impressive and terrifying. Premature babies can easily exceed that in their first month alone, especially if there are complications. The implications of his words settled over me like a weight. He wasn't just offering help. He was revealing how completely dependent I already was on his protection, whether I'd acknowledged it or not. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Vincent's smile was slow and certain, like a man who had been playing a long game and was finally ready to reveal his hand. "I want what's mine, Madison. I want my son to have my name, my protection, my legacy. And I want you to stop running from what we both know is inevitable." Before I could respond, Dr. Chen entered the room, followed by a nurse I didn't recognize. "Ms. Carter, we need to discuss the birth plan," she began, then stopped short when she saw Vincent. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." "Dr. Chen," Vincent said smoothly, extending his hand. "Vincent Moretti, the baby's father. I understand you'll be delivering my son tonight." Dr. Chen's demeanor shifted subtly as she shook his hand, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal recognition. "Mr. Moretti, of course. We'll take excellent care of both mother and baby, I assure you." As I watched this exchange, I realized with growing horror that Vincent's influence extended even into the delivery room, where I would be at my most vulnerable. The doctor who would bring my son into the world already knew who Vincent was, already understood that he was someone whose wishes carried weight. "I want a private suite for Madison," Vincent continued, his tone casual but leaving no room for argument. "And I want Dr. Reeves from Children's Hospital to attend the delivery. He's the best neonatologist in the state." "Of course, Mr. Moretti," Dr. Chen replied immediately. "I'll make the arrangements right away." As the medical staff hurried to accommodate Vincent's requests, I felt the walls of my carefully constructed independence crumbling around me. He had found me, yes, but more than that. He had been pulling the strings of my life for months without my knowledge. Every choice I thought I'd made independently had been guided by his invisible hand. The most terrifying part wasn't his power or his influence. It was the growing realization that despite everything I knew about who he was and what he was capable of, part of me felt relieved that I no longer had to carry this burden alone. The private suite Vincent had arranged was a far cry from the standard labor and delivery rooms I was accustomed to. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, while the furniture resembled a high-end hotel more than a hospital. Even in the midst of labor, I couldn't help but notice the fresh orchids on the side table, the Egyptian cotton sheets, the way the nursing staff moved with a deference I'd never seen them show to other patients. "This is unnecessary," I said, as another contraction peaked, my grip tightening on the bed rails. "I don't need all this luxury." Vincent, who had claimed the chair beside my bed as if it were a throne, leaned forward slightly. "My son will be born in circumstances befitting his position," he said simply. "As will his mother." The possessive way he spoke about our child sent a familiar chill through me, one that transported me back to that night in Las Vegas when I'd first glimpsed the intensity beneath his charming facade. We'd been in his hotel suite, a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of the Bellagio, and I'd been admiring the view of the Strip when he'd come up behind me, his hand settling on my waist with a proprietary confidence that should have been a warning. "You're different from the others," he'd murmured against my ear, his breath warm on my neck. "They want something from me. Money, status, protection. But you don't even know who I am, do you?" I'd turned in his arms, laughing softly. Should I? Are you famous or something? The innocence of that question now seemed almost laughable, but at the time, I'd been genuinely curious about this mysterious businessman who wore $1,000 suits like they were casual wear. In certain circles, he'd replied, his dark eyes studying my face with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. But tonight, I'm just Vincent, and you're just Madison. Nothing else matters. How wrong we'd both been. You're thinking about that night, Vincent observed, pulling me back to the present. His ability to read my expressions hadn't diminished over the months apart. Vegas. I'm thinking about how different things might have been if I'd known who you really were, I admitted, my voice strained as another wave of pain crested and receded. Would you have come to my room if you'd known? He asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. No, I said without hesitation. Never. Something flickered across his features. Disappointment, perhaps, or a flash of the predator I'd learned to fear. Yet here we are, regardless of what you might have chosen with full knowledge. Dr. Chen entered the room before I could respond, followed by Dr. Reeves, the neonatologist Vincent had summoned. They conferred quietly at the foot of my bed, their voices too low for me to catch the details, but their body language suggested everything was progressing normally. How much longer? Vincent asked, his question directed at Dr. Chen, but his eyes never leaving my face. First babies can be unpredictable, Dr. Chen replied diplomatically. But based on her progression, I'd estimate another few hours. A few more hours of this intimate captivity, of being unable to escape Vincent's penetrating gaze, or the implications of his presence. A few more hours before our son would be born, and Vincent's claim on both of us would become undeniable. I need to speak with you privately, I said to Vincent, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Before this goes any further. Vincent nodded to the medical staff, who discreetly withdrew, leaving us alone in the luxurious room. The silence stretched between us, filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of hospital life beyond our door. Why did you run? He asked before I could speak, his voice softer than I'd heard it all evening. That morning in Vegas, when I woke up and you were gone. Why didn't you wait? Why didn't you talk to me? The memory of that morning was still crystal clear in my mind. I'd woken before dawn, wrapped in Vincent's arms in the massive bed, feeling more content than I'd ever felt in my life. For a moment, I'd allowed myself to imagine that the night hadn't been a fluke, that this beautiful, powerful man might actually want something real with a small-town nurse from Ohio. Then his phone had rung. Answer it, he'd murmured, still half asleep, and I'd reached for the device on the nightstand without thinking. The caller ID had simply read, Sal, but when I'd answered, the voice on the other end had been urgent, speaking rapidly in Italian. Tell him the Torino shipment is late, the voice had said, switching to accented English when he realized I wasn't Vincent. Tell him we might have a problem with the family from Chicago. They're asking questions about the missing cargo. I'd hung up immediately, my blood running cold as puzzle pieces clicked into place. The expensive suite, the deference of the hotel staff, the way other guests seemed to recognize Vincent but kept their distance. The business he'd mentioned vaguely when I'd asked what he did for a living. You heard the phone call, Vincent said now, reading the memory in my expression. Sal's call about the Torino situation. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. You could have asked me about it, he continued. I would have explained. Explained what? I interrupted, my voice stronger now. That you're exactly what I thought you were? That the man I'd spent the night with was involved in something dangerous and illegal? Explained that my business, while complex, doesn't define who I am with you, Vincent replied calmly. That the violence and darkness you're imagining has never and will never touch you. But it would touch our child, I said, my hand moving protectively to my belly as another contraction began building. Any child born into your world would be a target, a liability, a bargaining chip. Vincent's expression hardened slightly. My son will have the best protection money can buy. He'll be safer than 99% of children in this country. Protected from what, Vincent? From the same dangers that your business creates. That's not protection. That's a prison. For a moment, Something vulnerable flashed in his eyes. A glimpse of the man I'd fallen for that night in Vegas. "You think I wanted this life?" he asked quietly. "You think I chose to inherit a legacy of violence and fear?" The question caught me off guard. In all my imaginings of this confrontation, I'd never considered that Vincent might be as trapped by his circumstances as I felt by mine. "My father built an empire to protect our family," he continued, his voice taking on a distant quality. "Every ruthless decision, every calculated move was designed to ensure that his children and grandchildren would never know poverty, never be vulnerable, never be at the mercy of others. But empires require maintenance, Madison. They require strength, vigilance, and yes, sometimes violence to protect what matters most." "And what matters most to you?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Vincent leaned forward, his hand covering mine on the bed rail. "You, our son. The family we could build together if you'd stop fighting what's already inevitable." His touch was warm, familiar, sending unwanted sparks through my nervous system despite everything. "I won't let you turn our child into a weapon," I said, but my voice lacked the conviction I'd felt just moments before. "I want to turn him into an heir," Vincent corrected. "To give him every advantage, every opportunity, every protection this world can offer." Is that really so terrible? Before I could answer, another contraction hit, stronger than the previous ones, demanding my complete attention. As I breathed through the pain, I felt Vincent's other hand settle gently on my shoulder, offering an anchor of stability in the storm. "Let me protect you both," he said quietly. "Let me take care of you the way you deserve to be taken care of. You've been alone long enough, Madison." The offer hung in the air between us, tempting in its simplicity. Part of me wanted to surrender to the safety he represented, to stop fighting a battle I was clearly losing. But another part, the part that had sustained me through months of hiding and fear, refused to give up so easily. "What are you proposing?" I asked finally. Vincent's smile was slow and triumphant, as if he'd been waiting for exactly this question. "Partnership," he said. "You keep your job if you want it, though you'll never need to work again. You'll have your own space, your own life, but under my protection. And our son will have everything he needs to thrive. And in exchange, you stop running from me," he said simply. "You let me be a father to our child. You let me show you that the man you met in Vegas is still here, beneath everything else." The contraction was fading now, leaving me exhausted and emotionally raw. As I looked into Vincent's dark eyes, I saw something that surprised me. Hope. This powerful, dangerous man was hoping I would choose him, choose the life he was offering. "I need guarantees," I said finally. "About our son's safety, about his future, about my role in his life." Vincent's grip on my hand tightened slightly. "Name them." "He never gets involved in your business. Ever. No matter how old he gets, no matter what happens." "Agreed. I maintain full custody, legal custody. You don't get to make decisions about his education or medical care without my consent." Vincent hesitated, and I could see him calculating the implications. "Joint custody," he countered, "but I defer to your judgment on matters of his daily care and upbringing." It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was more than I'd expected him to offer. "And if I ever feel like he's in danger because of your world, I get to take him and leave. No questions, no pursuit." This time, Vincent's hesitation was longer, more loaded with meaning. "If you ever truly believe he's in danger," he said finally, "then we discuss it, together, as parents should." It wasn't the guarantee I'd asked for, but something in his tone suggested it was as close as I was going to get. And perhaps, given the circumstances, it was enough. "I need time to think about it," I said, though we both knew time was rapidly running out. Vincent nodded, bringing my hand to his lips in a gesture that was both tender and possessive. "Take all the time you need, cara mia, but our son won't wait for you to decide." The decision was taken from my hands an hour later, when Dr. Chen announced that our son was ready to make his entrance into the world. As the medical team prepared for delivery, Vincent moved to stand beside my head, his presence both comforting and overwhelming as the final stages of labor intensified. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured, his hand finding mine and squeezing gently as another contraction peaked. "He's going to be perfect, Madison. Strong, just like his mother." The compliment shouldn't have affected me given everything else happening. But something in his tone, genuine admiration mixed with fierce protectiveness, made my chest tighten with emotions I couldn't afford to examine. "One more push," Dr. Chen encouraged, and suddenly the room was filled with the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Our son's first cry, strong and indignant at being forced from his warm sanctuary into the bright, cold world. "He's perfect," Dr. Reeves announced, his voice filled with professional satisfaction. "Good weight for 30 weeks, excellent lung capacity, strong reflexes. A fighter, just like we hoped." Through the haze of exhaustion and overwhelming emotion, I watched Vincent's face as he saw his son for the first time. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. The dangerous, controlled man I'd been negotiating with disappeared, replaced by someone raw and vulnerable and utterly captivated. "Mason," he said softly, the name falling from his lips as if he'd been saving it for this exact moment. "His name is Mason." I wanted to protest that we hadn't discussed names, that I should have a say in what our son was called, but the way Vincent spoke it, with such certainty and tenderness, made the objection die in my throat. Mason. It felt right somehow, strong and solid and unpretentious. "He needs to go to the NICU for monitoring," Dr. Reeves explained as the nurses prepared to transfer our son. "Standard procedure for premature births, but his prognosis is excellent." "I want to see him first," I said, exhaustion making my voice weaker than I intended. "Before you take him." Dr. Chen nodded, and suddenly Mason was placed on my chest, his tiny face scrunched and red, his miniature fingers grasping at air. He was so small, so fragile, yet I could already see Vincent in the shape of his nose, the determined set of his jaw, even in distress. "Hello, baby boy," I whispered, tears I hadn't realized I was crying falling onto his downy head. "I'm your mama. I've been waiting so long to meet you." Vincent's hand settled gently on Mason's back, his palm nearly covering our son's entire torso. "And I'm your papa," he said quietly. "Ti amo, Piccolo. I love you, little one." The Italian words, spoken with such tenderness, sent an unexpected wave of emotion through me. This was what I'd feared and hoped for in equal measure. Seeing Vincent as a father, witnessing the love he was already capable of feeling for our child. Too soon, the medical team whisked Mason away to the NICU, leaving Vincent and me alone in the suddenly quiet room. The absence of our son's presence felt like a physical ache, an emptiness that made me understand why Vincent had been so determined to claim us both. "He's beautiful," Vincent said, his voice still soft with wonder. "Thank you, Madison, for giving me this gift." Before I could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door, followed immediately by the entrance of a man I didn't recognize. He was shorter than Vincent, but carried himself with the same predatory confidence, his expensive suit and cold eyes marking him as someone from Vincent's world. "We have a problem," the man said without preamble, his gaze flicking briefly to me before focusing entirely on Vincent. "The Torino situation has escalated. They know about the girl." Vincent's entire demeanor shifted, the tender father disappearing behind a mask of lethal calm. "Not here, Sal," he said quietly, but the warning in his voice was unmistakable. "They've got people at the hospital," Sal continued, ignoring the warning. "Asking questions about room assignments, visiting schedules. They know she's here, Vincent. They know about the kid." The blood in my veins turned to ice as the implications sank in. Whatever Vincent had been protecting me from, it had found us anyway. The fantasy that I could somehow negotiate my way out of his world crumbled as I realized that I was already too deep to escape. "How many?" Vincent asked, his voice deadly calm. "At least 4 that we've identified. Probably more." Sal's expression was grim. "They're being subtle about it, but it's definitely reconnaissance." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through options and contingencies. When he spoke again, his tone brooked no argument. "Double the security on this floor. I want our people at every exit, every stairwell, every service entrance. And get Dr. Chen. I want Madison and the baby moved to a more secure location." "Vincent," I began, fear making my voice shake. What's happening? Who are the Torinos? He turned to me, and for a moment, his carefully controlled mask slipped, revealing the depth of his concern. A competing family, he said simply. They've been trying to expand into my territory for months. Using you and Mason to pressure me would be strategically sound from their perspective. The clinical way he discussed the threat to our lives should have terrified me, but instead, it clarified everything. This wasn't about choices anymore, about what I wanted or feared. This was about survival, mine and our sons. What do you need me to do? I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Vincent's expression softened slightly at my capitulation. Trust me, he said simply. Let me protect you both the way I should have been doing all along. Over the next hour, I watched Vincent's world unfold around us with military precision. Men appeared and disappeared with silent efficiency. The hospital staff began moving with a deference that bordered on fear, and our luxurious room was transformed into something that felt more like a bunker than a maternity suite. Dr. Chen returned with an update on Mason's condition. Excellent, considering his premature arrival, and a proposal. Mr. Moretti, we can arrange for a private wing at Children's Hospital, she offered. Better security, specialized care, and more control over who has access. Do it, Vincent replied without hesitation, and I want Madison transferred there as well. Same room if possible. I should go home, I protested weakly. I can't afford extended hospital stays, and Mason will be in the NICU for weeks anyway. Vincent's laugh was devoid of humor. Your apartment is the first place they'll look, Madison, and as for the cost. He gestured vaguely, dismissing my financial concerns as irrelevant. Money is not a factor in my son's care. As if to emphasize his point, Sal returned with a tablet, showing Vincent what appeared to be security footage. I caught a glimpse of the screen, men in suits loitering near the hospital's main entrance, their body language suggesting they were waiting for something. Definitely Torino's people, Sal confirmed, but they're keeping their distance for now, probably waiting to see if you'll bring the kid outside. Then we don't, Vincent said simply. We make Children's Hospital our base of operations until this is resolved. The ease with which he rearranged reality to suit his needs should have frightened me, but instead, I found myself grateful for his competence. Whatever game was being played around us, Vincent clearly understood the rules better than I ever could. There's something else, Sal added, his tone carrying a weight that made Vincent's attention sharpen. We intercepted communications. They're not just interested in leverage. They want the kid, permanently. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt what little color I had left drain from my face. What does that mean? I whispered. Vincent's expression became absolutely lethal. It means, he said quietly, that negotiation is no longer an option. It means this ends only one way. As if responding to the tension in the room, Mason's cry echoed from the NICU, through the baby monitor Dr. Chen had thoughtfully provided. The sound of our son's distress made something primal and fierce rise in my chest, a protective instinct that dwarfed every other consideration. I accept, I said suddenly, the words surprising even me. Your proposal, your protection, all of it. Vincent's eyes met mine, and I saw satisfaction there, but also something deeper. Relief, perhaps, or recognition that we were finally on the same side. Welcome to the family, cara mia, he said softly. Now let's go get our son. The private wing at Children's Hospital felt like entering a different world entirely. One where Vincent's influence had transformed a medical facility into something resembling a fortress. As I was wheeled through corridors that had been mysteriously cleared of all other visitors, I began to understand the true scope of what I'd agreed to accept. The entire floor has been reserved, Vincent explained as we moved toward what would become our temporary home. No unauthorized personnel, no unexpected visitors, no security gaps. His hand rested possessively on my shoulder as he walked beside the wheelchair, his touch both comforting and claiming. The suite they'd prepared was nothing short of extraordinary. What should have been a standard hospital room had been transformed into something that rivaled the most luxurious hotels. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. The lighting had been adjusted to something warm and welcoming rather than clinical. And through the large windows, I could see armed men positioned discreetly around the building's perimeter. This is excessive, I murmured, though I had to admit the lengths Vincent had gone to ensure our comfort were impressive. How many people does it take to protect one premature baby? However many it takes, Vincent replied without hesitation. The Torinos aren't just a business rival, Madison. They're animals who would use an innocent child to settle old scores. His jaw tightened as he spoke, and I caught a glimpse of the ruthless man beneath the concerned father facade. They made this personal the moment they targeted my family. Our son, Mason, was in the NICU just down the hall, surrounded by the best medical equipment money could buy and guarded by men who looked more like special forces operators than hospital security. I'd been allowed to hold him again before being settled into recovery, his tiny form fitting perfectly in my arms, while his impossibly small fingers had wrapped around my thumb with surprising strength. "He's going to be spoiled beyond belief," I said, watching Vincent pace near the windows like a caged predator. All this luxury, all these resources at his disposal. "He's a Moretti," Vincent replied as if that explained everything. Luxury isn't spoiling when it's your birthright. The casual arrogance in his statement should have annoyed me, but instead, I found myself fascinated by this glimpse into how Vincent viewed the world. In his mind, our son wasn't being given extraordinary advantages. He was simply receiving what was rightfully his. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts, and Dr. Chen entered with an update on Mason's condition. "He's responding beautifully to treatment," she reported, her smile genuine despite the unusual circumstances. "His breathing is strong, his reflexes are excellent, and his weight gain is already ahead of schedule." "When can he come home?" Vincent asked, and I noticed he didn't specify whose home he meant. "Premature babies typically need several weeks of monitoring," Dr. Chen explained diplomatically. "But given the quality of care we can provide here, and the unique security situation, it might be best to extend that timeline slightly." Vincent nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "Whatever he needs. Cost is not a consideration." After Dr. Chen left, silence settled over the room, broken only by the soft hum of medical equipment and the distant sounds of the hospital. I found myself studying Vincent's profile as he stood by the window, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands remained clenched even in repose. "Tell me about them," I said quietly. "The Torinos. What do they really want?" Vincent turned, his expression guarded. "Are you sure you want to know? Some knowledge can't be unknown, Madison." "I'm already in this, aren't I? Whether I understand it or not, I'm part of your world now. I'd rather know what I'm facing." He was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much truth I could handle. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grievances and barely controlled fury. "The Torino family has been trying to expand into Nevada for 3 years," he began, settling into the chair beside my bed. "They see our operations here as outdated, inefficient. They believe they can provide the same services with more aggressive methods." "Services," I repeated, understanding that this was likely a euphemism for activities I didn't want to examine too closely. "Protection, dispute resolution, import logistics," Vincent said smoothly. "Legitimate businesses that happen to operate in gray areas." He paused, studying my face. "The specifics don't matter. What matters is that they've decided the most efficient way to eliminate me is to eliminate everything I care about." The implications sent a chill through me. "And now that includes Mason and me." "Now that includes my entire reason for living," Vincent corrected, his voice dropping to something almost tender. "Which makes them more dangerous than they realize, because a man with nothing left to lose is capable of anything." Before I could respond to the intensity in his declaration, Sal appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. "We've got movement," he reported. 3 vehicles just pulled up to the south entrance. Torino's top lieutenant plus at least 6 soldiers. Vincent was on his feet instantly, every trace of the tender father disappearing behind a mask of lethal calculation. "They're testing our response time," he said, moving toward a laptop that had been set up on a side table, "seeing how quickly we react, how many people we have positioned." "What do we do?" I asked, hating the fear in my voice but unable to suppress it. "You stay here," Vincent replied firmly, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he accessed what appeared to be a building-wide security system. "Sal, get Martinez and his team to the south entrance. I want a show of force, but no engagement unless they make the first move. As Sal departed to carry out the orders, I watched Vincent orchestrate our defense with the same efficiency he'd shown in arranging our medical care. This wasn't a man playing at being dangerous. This was someone who lived and breathed strategy, who thought in terms of chess moves and calculated risks. "How long can this go on?" I asked. "This standoff, this protection detail, all of it?" Vincent glanced up from the laptop, his expression softening slightly when he saw the exhaustion in my face. "As long as necessary," he said simply. "But not much longer. The Torinos have overplayed their hand by coming here, by threatening my family so openly." "What does that mean?" His smile was cold and predatory. "It means they've given me justification for a response that will end this permanently." The quiet certainty in his voice should have terrified me, but instead I felt something like relief. Whatever Vincent was planning, whatever permanent solution he had in mind, it would mean Mason and I could finally stop looking over our shoulders. "I want to see him," I said suddenly. "Our son. Before. Whatever you're planning happens." Vincent's expression softened immediately. "Of course. Let me check with security first." As he made the necessary calls, I found myself marveling at how completely my life had been reorganized around Vincent's world. 24 hours ago, I'd been an independent woman with a secret. Now I was the mother of a Moretti heir, protected by armed guards and dependent on Vincent's empire for my very survival. The strangest part was that I didn't entirely regret it. Watching Vincent command resources and loyalty with such natural authority, seeing the lengths he would go to protect our son, I began to understand why people were drawn into his orbit. There was something intoxicating about being shielded by that kind of power, about knowing that someone would move heaven and earth to keep you safe. "It's clear," Vincent announced, returning to my side. "Would you like a wheelchair, or do you feel strong enough to walk?" "I can walk," I said, accepting his offered arm as I stood. The short journey to the NICU felt monumental, each step taking me further from the woman I'd been, and closer to whoever I was becoming. Mason was sleeping when we arrived, his tiny chest rising and falling with mechanical precision under the careful monitoring of machines that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. But he was breathing on his own now, Dr. Chen had assured us, the ventilator having been removed that morning. "He looks like you," I murmured, watching Vincent's face as he studied our son through the incubator's clear walls. "He has your mouth," Vincent replied, his voice soft with wonder, "and your stubborn chin." He glanced at me, something vulnerable flickering in his dark eyes. "Thank you, Madison. For him. For trusting me. For letting me protect you both." As if responding to his father's voice, Mason stirred slightly, one tiny hand moving toward the sound. Vincent immediately reached through the incubator's porthole, offering his finger for Mason to grasp. "Papa's here, Piccolo," he whispered. "Papa will always be here." Watching them together, this dangerous man and this innocent child, I felt the last of my resistance crumble completely. Whatever Vincent's world demanded of us, whatever prices we would have to pay for his protection, it was worth it to see Mason safe and loved. The sound of approaching footsteps made Vincent's head snap up, his body tensing for potential threat. But it was only Dr. Chen, carrying what appeared to be discharge papers. "Mr. Moretti," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "I have some news about the security situation. It seems the individuals who were causing concern have departed the premises." Vincent's smile was sharp and satisfied. "All of them?" "All of them," Dr. Chen confirmed. "The police are investigating what they're calling a coordinated retreat, but there don't appear to be any ongoing threats." As Vincent thanked her and made arrangements for Mason's continued care, I realized I didn't want to know what kind of response had convinced the Torinos to retreat so quickly. Some knowledge, as Vincent had said, couldn't be unknown. What mattered was that we were safe, that our son would grow up protected, and that I had finally stopped running from the inevitable. "Welcome to forever, cara mia," Vincent murmured, his arms settling around my waist as we watched our son sleep. This is just the beginning. 3 weeks later, as Mason grew stronger in his specialized nursery, and I recovered in the luxury of Vincent's protection, I learned what it truly meant to be part of the Moretti legacy. The Torino threat hadn't simply disappeared as Dr. Chen had suggested. It had been systematically dismantled with a precision that was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. Their operations in Nevada have been completely shut down, Vincent explained over breakfast in our private dining room, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. Their lieutenant is in federal custody on unrelated charges, and their remaining soldiers have accepted employment opportunities in other states. I didn't ask what kind of employment opportunities Vincent had arranged, or what evidence had suddenly materialized to put a federal case together. Some details of my new life were better left unexplored. Mason had been moved to a private nursery within our wing, still requiring medical monitoring but healthy enough that I could hold him for hours at a time. Watching Vincent with our son had become my favorite part of each day. Seeing this powerful, dangerous man reduced to complete tenderness by a baby's grip on his finger, hearing him speak softly in Italian as Mason slept against his chest. "He's going to be discharge ready soon," I said, cradling Mason as he finished his morning feeding. "Dr. Chen thinks another week, maybe 2. Vincent nodded, but something in his expression suggested he had more on his mind than Mason's medical progress. "We need to discuss arrangements," he said carefully, "for when you're both ready to leave the hospital." This was the conversation I'd been both anticipating and dreading. For 3 weeks, we'd existed in a bubble of shared concern for Mason, our complicated history temporarily set aside in favor of our son's needs. But that grace period was ending, and real decisions would have to be made about our future. "I've been thinking about that," I said, adjusting Mason's position so I could see Vincent's face clearly. "I want to go back to work eventually. Not immediately, but when Mason's older, when he doesn't need constant monitoring." "Absolutely," Vincent agreed, surprising me with his immediate acceptance. "Though perhaps not at Mercy General. I've spoken with the administrators at Children's Hospital. They'd be honored to have someone with your experience and dedication." The casual way he rearranged career opportunities should have annoyed me, but I was beginning to understand that this was simply how Vincent operated. He saw problems and solved them, often before the people affected even realized solutions were needed. "And living arrangements?" I asked, the question that had been weighing most heavily on my mind. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "I've had a house prepared," he said. "In the hills, about 20 minutes from the main estate. Secure, private, but close enough that I can be there in minutes if needed." "Your estate?" "The family compound," he clarified. "My parents' old home, where I grew up. It's been in the Moretti family for 4 generations." The idea of living so close to the heart of Vincent's world should have concerned me, but instead, I found myself curious about this glimpse into his history. "And this other house?" "Originally built for my grandmother when she became widowed," Vincent explained. "She wanted independence, but also family nearby. It seemed like an appropriate model for our situation." Before I could respond, Sal appeared in the doorway, his expression more serious than usual. "Vincent, we have a situation. The federal task force wants to meet." Vincent's entire demeanor shifted, the relaxed father disappearing behind his professional mask. "About what?" "The Torino investigations. They want to discuss ongoing cooperation and future considerations." The coded language told me this was related to whatever Vincent had done to eliminate the threat to our family, but the implications were clearly more complex than I'd realized. "When?" Vincent asked. "This afternoon. They're suggesting a neutral location." Vincent was quiet for a moment, clearly calculating risks and benefits. "Set it up," he decided, "but I want full security protocols, no surprises." As Sal departed to make arrangements, I felt a familiar chill of fear. This is about us, isn't it? About what happened to protect Mason and me? Vincent moved to sit beside me, his hand settling gently on Mason's back as our son slept in my arms. "Sometimes cooperation with law enforcement serves everyone's interests," he said diplomatically. "The federal government wants to see certain criminal enterprises shut down, and I want to ensure my family's safety. Occasionally, those goals align." "You made a deal with them," I realized, "to eliminate the Torinos." "I provided information that helped them build cases against genuinely dangerous criminals," Vincent corrected. "Men who would have continued to threaten innocent people if left unchecked." The distinction felt important to him, and I was beginning to understand why. In Vincent's world, there were rules, codes of conduct that separated acceptable business from genuine evil. The Torinos had crossed those lines when they threatened a child. "What does this mean for us?" I asked. "For our future?" Vincent's smile was slight but genuine. "It means we'll have fewer complications going forward. Sometimes the best way to protect what you love is to ensure that those who would threaten it no longer have the capability to do so." Before I could process the full implications of this revelation, Dr. Chen entered with Mason's latest test results and a smile that told me everything I needed to know. "He's ready," she announced. "All his levels are perfect, his weight gain is excellent, and his breathing is completely stable. Mr. Moretti, you can take your son home." The word home hung in the air, laden with meaning. Vincent's home, not mine. The house he'd prepared, not a place I'd chosen. Yet as I looked down at Mason's peaceful face, I realized that home had become wherever the three of us were together. "I'll make the arrangements," Vincent said, already reaching for his phone to coordinate what would undoubtedly be a carefully orchestrated departure. As the afternoon progressed and preparations were made for our transition to the outside world, I found myself in the strange position of feeling both grateful and terrified. Grateful for Vincent's protection, for the resources he'd marshaled to keep Mason safe, for the genuine love I saw in his eyes when he looked at our son. But terrified of losing myself completely in the comfortable cage he was building around us. "You're having second thoughts," Vincent observed as we waited for the final discharge paperwork. Mason was sleeping in his car seat, a top-of-the-line model that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries, while a small army of security personnel prepared for our departure. "Not second thoughts," I said carefully. "Just processing everything that's changed." Vincent moved closer, his hand finding mine with the same gentle possessiveness I was learning to expect. "You know I'll never hurt you," he said quietly. "Either of you. Whatever else you might fear about this life, about my world, that's not something you ever need to worry about." "I know," I replied, and realized I genuinely meant it. Whatever Vincent was capable of in his business, whatever darkness existed in his world, I had seen enough to believe that his love for Mason and me was real and protective. "Then trust me to take care of you," he said. "Both of you. Let me give you the life you deserve." As if on cue, Mason stirred in his carrier, his eyes opening to focus with surprising clarity on Vincent's face. When Vincent smiled at him, our son's mouth curved in what might have been his first real smile, and I felt the last of my resistance melt away completely. "Okay," I said softly. "Let's go home." Vincent's answering smile was radiant with triumph and something deeper. Relief, perhaps, that I had finally chosen him freely, without coercion or fear driving my decision. As we prepared to leave the hospital that had become our sanctuary, I realized that I wasn't losing my independence by accepting Vincent's protection. I was choosing a different kind of strength, one that came from partnership rather than isolation, from shared responsibility rather than shouldering everything alone. Whatever challenges lay ahead in our unconventional family, whatever prices would have to be paid for the security Vincent's world provided, we would face them together, and perhaps in the end, that was enough. The black SUV was waiting when we emerged from the hospital, surrounded by the discreet but unmistakable presence of Vincent's security team. As we settled into the vehicle with Mason secure between us, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the tinted windows. A family, complicated and unconventional, but undeniably real. "Ready?" Vincent asked, his hand covering mine as the driver waited for instructions. I looked down at Mason, then back at Vincent, seeing my future reflected in his dark eyes. "Ready," I said, and meant it completely. As we drove toward whatever came next, I realized that sometimes the most important choice isn't between safety and freedom, but between facing the unknown alone, or with someone who would fight the world to protect what mattered most. Vincent had given me that choice, and I had chosen him.